The mud of Derbyshire is indifferent to the lineage of the woman kneeling in it, just as Evelyn is indifferent to the Duke who watches her from the shadows with a heart finally, fatally breaking. The midnight air is a wet weight against her skin, and the rain has long since turned the silk of her gown into a heavy, sodden second skin that clings to her legs. She does not look up. She cannot afford the distraction of his presence or the flickering light of the lantern he holds. Her focus is entirely on the wooden spokes of the carriage wheel and the coarse rag in her hand. She scrubs with a rhythmic, violent intensity, pushing the bristles of the brush into the crevices where the filth of the road has hardened. Her knuckles are raw. The skin has split over her joints, and the salt of the rainwater stings the open wounds, but she welcomes the pain. It is a sharp, honest thing in a world that has been nothing but soft lies and velvet cages. 5 paces away, Julian stands as still as a monument. The light from his lantern casts long, dancing shadows across the crumbling stone walls of the coaching inn, making him look even taller, even more imposing than he is. He wears a cloak of the finest wool, a garment that cost more than the cottage Evelyn now calls home, and the water beads on its surface, unable to penetrate the weave. He looks like a man witnessing a sacrilege. To him, this is more than just a woman cleaning a carriage in the dead of night. It is the destruction of every rule he has ever lived by. He sees the daughter of a baronet, a woman he once danced with in a room lit by 1,000 candles, reduced to the labor of a stable boy. He sees the ruin of his own pride in the mud on her face. Evelyn knows he is there. She can feel the heat of his gaze even through the cold downpour. But she does not stop. She moves to the next wheel, her knees sinking deeper into the mire. She had taken this job because the woman inside the inn, a lady of high standing and higher pretensions, had complained that her carriage was too foul to enter the village. Evelyn had stepped forward and offered to clean it for a shilling. She did not tell the lady her name. She did not mention that the Duke of Thornefield was currently scouring the countryside looking for her. She simply took the rag and went to work. It is a small thing, a shilling, but it is a shilling she earned. It is a shilling that does not belong to Julian Ashford. It does not come from a ledger of mercy or a fund of guilt. It is hers. Julian finally finds his voice, though it is thin and cracked, stripped of its usual ducal authority. He asks her why she is doing this. He asks her if she wants to humiliate him so completely that he can never show his face in the county again. Evelyn stops then. She lets the rag fall into the muck and slowly, painfully, she stands up. She wipes a streak of wet hair from her eyes with the back of a hand that is stained gray with grease. She looks at him, and for the first time in his life, Julian sees a woman who is not afraid of him. She is not even angry. She is simply finished. She tells him that his humiliation is a luxury she cannot afford to care about. She tells him that she is cleaning a carriage because she is hungry, and because the mud is cleaner than his charity. As the rain falls on Evelyn's pride, I wonder where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps you are tucked away in a quiet corner of London, or watching the stars from a porch in a land Evelyn could never imagine. If you find yourself swept up in her journey, I invite you to subscribe to Whispered Thrones and join our circle. If you leave without subscribing, I shall consider you in my debt for a dance at the next assembly, and I am a very persistent creditor. Now, let me take you back to where this began. Let me show you the gilded cage she chose to shatter and the man who thought he could keep her heart behind silver bars. Thornefield Hall was a place where silence was cultivated like a rare orchid. It lived in the high, vaulted ceilings and the long, gallery hallways where the portraits of Ashford ancestors stared down with eyes that seemed to judge anyone who breathed too loudly. For Evelyn Vance, that silence was a suffocating weight. She had lived within those walls for 3 years, ever since the day her father breathed his last in a room that smelled of sour ale and unwashed bedding. He had died a debtor, a man whose name was a punchline in the clubs of St. James, and Evelyn had been left with nothing but the dress she wore and a mountain of unpaid bills that she could never hope to climb. It was Julian who had come for her. He had arrived at the prison in a carriage that looked like a black diamond, his face a mask of solemn duty. He told her that he had been a friend of her father, though Evelyn could not remember them ever sharing a kind word. He told her that it was his responsibility to ensure she did not fall into the hands of the parish. He offered her a position as a companion to his sister, Lady Augusta. It was presented as an act of the purest altruism, a noble hand extended to a drowning girl. Evelyn had taken it because the alternative was a life of such sharp, jagged uncertainty that her courage failed her. But the years at Thornefield had taught her that nothing is truly free, especially not the kindness of a duke. She was a companion in name, but in reality, she was a ghost. She was expected to sit in the morning room and sew until her fingers ached, to listen to Augusta's endless complaints about the quality of the local lace, and to be grateful. Always, she was expected to be grateful. Every meal she ate, every fire that warmed her room, every stitch of clothing on her back was a reminder of her dependence. She carried a small, smooth river stone in her pocket, a piece of gray granite she had found by the stream on the day of her father's funeral. It was the only thing she owned that had not been bought by Julian's hand. When the weight of her gratitude became too heavy to bear, she would reach into her pocket and rub the stone until her thumb was raw, reminding herself that there was still something in the world that was solid and cold and hers alone. Julian Ashford was a man who moved through the world as though it were a map he had already memorized. He was the 8th Duke of Thornefield, and he carried the title like a suit of armor. He was 31. But he possessed a stillness that made him seem much older, a gravity that pulled the air out of any room he entered. He was not a cruel man in the traditional sense. He did not raise his voice, and he was never unkind to the servants. But he governed his life and his estate with a terrifying precision. He believed that everything had a place, and everyone had a price. His library was his sanctuary, a cavernous room filled with the scent of old leather and beeswax. It was there that he spent his evenings, meticulously managing the vast web of interests that made up the Ashford fortune. One evening, he sat at his desk, the light of a single candle illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He held a letter from Evelyn, a short, polite request for a small increase in her quarterly allowance. She had written that she wished to purchase some books of her own and perhaps a new set of brushes for her watercolors. Julian read the letter once, his expression unreadable. Then, he held the corner of the paper to the candle flame. He watched it curl and blacken, the words turning to ash before they could even hit the grate. He looked at his steward, who stood waiting in the shadows. He told the man to deny the request. He said that Miss Vance had everything she could possibly need within these walls. He said that she must learn that he was her only sanctuary, and that to look outside of his provision was both ungrateful and unnecessary. The world of 1818 was not a kind place for a woman with a name but no coin. In the village of Oakhaven, which sat in the long shadow of Thornefield Hall, the social order was as rigid as the winter frost. A woman in Evelyn's position was a nonentity, a creature caught between the upstairs and the downstairs, belonging to neither. To leave Julian's protection would not be seen as an act of independence, it would be seen as a descent into ruin. There was no middle ground for a baronet's daughter. She was either a lady under a great man's wing, or she was a fallen thing, a cautionary tale to be whispered about over tea. Evelyn understood this better than Julian did. She knew that the stakes for her were not merely a loss of comfort, but a loss of safety. If she left, she faced the real possibility of the workhouse or the desperate, gray life of a governess in a house where she would be treated worse than the spaniels. Julian, for all his intelligence, could not conceive of a life where money was not a shield. He viewed the world from the balcony of his status, looking down at the struggle of the common people as though it were a play being performed for his benefit. Every time he tried to save Evelyn, he did so by throwing money at the problem, never realizing that he was only making the bars of her cage thicker and more golden. He didn't understand that she didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. The midwinter gala at Thornefield Hall was an affair of staggering opulence. The grand ballroom was a sea of white silk and black wool, lit by 1,000 beeswax candles that dripped slow, pale tracks down silver holders. The scent of hothouse lilies and expensive perfume was thick enough to taste. Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, her back against a marble pillar. She was wearing a dress of deep, midnight blue silk that Julian had ordered from London specifically for the occasion. It was a beautiful garment, perfectly tailored to her slight frame, but to Evelyn, it felt like a uniform. Julian approached her, cutting through the crowd with the ease of a shark in a kelp forest. He dismissed a group of minor lords with a single, curt nod and came to stand beside her. He did not look at her directly at first. He looked out at the room, his hand resting on the hilt of his dress sword. He remarked that the blue suited her. He said he had been right to choose it, as it brought out the gray of her eyes. He spoke as though he were admiring a new statue he had purchased for the garden, a fine piece of craftsmanship that reflected well on his taste. Evelyn felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her throat. She looked at his hand, specifically the heavy gold signet ring on his finger. It was a symbol of everything that crushed her, the weight of 1,000 years of Ashford's power. She took a slow, deliberate breath and reached for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. She looked Julian square in the eye, and then, with a hand that did not shake, she tilted the glass and poured the pale, bubbling liquid directly onto the hem of the midnight blue silk. The fabric darkened instantly, the stain spreading like a bruise. She whispered that he should have chosen a color that didn't stain so easily. It was a small act of defiance. But in that crowded room, it felt like a gunshot. Julian's face went perfectly still. For a moment, the mask of the Duke slipped, and she saw a flash of something raw and bewildered in his eyes. 2 months later, the cold of the gala had been replaced by the damp, clinging fog of early spring. Evelyn was in Julian's study, looking for a book he had mentioned, when she found it. It was a small, leather-bound volume tucked away in the back of a drawer, labeled Ledger of Mercy in Julian's precise, elegant hand. She opened it, expecting to find records of his charitable donations to the local parish. Instead, she found her own name. Page after page was filled with a list of her father's debts, many of them dating back years. But they were not marked as paid. They were marked as transferred. Julian had not been paying her father's creditors to clear the Vance name. He had been buying the debts himself. He had spent thousands of pounds to become her sole creditor. Every merchant she had ever owed a shilling to, every dressmaker, every landlord, they had all been paid by the Duke of Thornefield, and in exchange, they had signed over their claims to him. He had effectively cornered the market on her life. He had ensured that no one else could hire her, no one else could house her, and no one else could help her. She was not a guest at Thornefield Hall. She was an asset. When she confronted him that evening, Julian did not deny it. He stood by the fireplace, the orange glow of the embers casting long shadows across his face. He argued that he had preserved her. He said that if he had not bought those debts, she would have been hounded by bailiffs and tossed into the street. He spoke with a terrifying conviction, as though his control over her life was the ultimate expression of care. He could not see the difference between safety and a prison. He truly believed that by owning her, he was loving her. It was that night that Evelyn made her decision. She went to her room and packed a small bundle. She took no silk, no lace, no jewelry that had come from his hand. She took only her sturdy walking shoes, a plain wool cloak, and the river stone. She left Thornefield Hall under the cover of a thick Derbyshire fog, walking down the long, winding drive until the great house disappeared into the grey. She found a small, drafty cottage on the edge of Oakhaven, a place that smelled of damp earth and old smoke, and she took a job as a laundress for the village. She would rather scrub the grime of the world from other people's clothes than spend another night as a line item in Julian Ashford's ledger. The first twist came not from Julian, but from the papers she had taken with her. In her haste, she had grabbed a handful of documents from the drawer, thinking they were more of her father's debts. But as she sat by the weak light of a tallow candle in her new home, she realized they were something else entirely. They were letters between Julian's father, the 7th Duke, and his solicitor. They revealed a systematic plan to sabotage the Vance family's investments. Her father hadn't been a fool or a gambler, he had been a victim. The old Duke had intentionally ruined the Vance estate to seize their mineral-rich land for his own mining interests. This changed everything. Julian's charity was not just a toxic form of love. It was blood money. He had known the truth. He had kept those letters in his desk, hidden away, while he played the role of the noble protector. He had watched her struggle with the shame of her father's failure for 3 years, knowing all along that his own father was the architect of that ruin. He hadn't been protecting her from the world, he had been protecting his family's reputation from her. The betrayal felt like a cold blade between her ribs, the escalation was swift and brutal. Julian's sister, Augusta, was incensed by Evelyn's departure. She viewed it as a personal insult, a common girl spitting in the face of ducal generosity. She began to spread a rumor through the village that Evelyn had been cast out because she had been caught stealing from the Ashford silver. In a small town like Oakhaven, a rumor like that was a death sentence. The local apothecary, who had known Evelyn for years, suddenly found that he could not offer her credit for the medicine she needed when she fell ill with a lung fever. The winter was the harshest in a decade, and the unheated cottage became a frozen tomb. Julian visited her once during her illness. He did not come as a suitor or a friend. He came as a man trying to buy his way out of a guilty conscience. He stood in the doorway of her small, cramped room, his expensive boots looking absurd on the dirt floor. He offered her a blank check. He told her she could go to London, live in a house in Mayfair, have everything she ever dreamed of, provided she never spoke of his family again. He thought he was offering her a way out. He didn't realize he was just offering her a more expensive cage. It broke her heart that even now, even after everything, he still thought she had a price. The morning of the breaking point arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. A freezing rain was falling, turning the village square into a treacherous sea of ice and gray slush. Evelyn had dragged herself out of bed to fetch water from the well, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her fever had broken, but it had left her weak, her body feeling as thin and brittle as a dried leaf. She was crossing the square when the Thornefield carriage pulled up, the horses' hooves clattering loudly on the stones. Julian stepped out before the carriage had even come to a full stop. He was not wearing his cloak, and his white shirt was already beginning to cling to his shoulders in the rain. He looked frantic, his usual composure shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He strode toward her and reached out to grab her arm, his intention clear. He was going to force her into the carriage. He was going to take her back to the hall, to a doctor, to the safety she had rejected. He shouted that she was killing herself. He said that he would not stand by and watch her die in the mud for the sake of her pride. Evelyn didn't pull away. She didn't have the strength. But she looked at him with a clarity that made him flinch. She asked him if he thought this mud was a tragedy. She told him that the only tragedy in the square was a man who thought a title was a heart. Her voice was low, but it carried through the cold air, drawing the eyes of the few villagers who were brave enough to be out in the storm. She told him that she would rather rot in that cottage as Evelyn Vance than reign in his hall as a ghost he had bought and paid for. She told him that he did not know how to love, that he only knew how to own. And then she said the words that finally broke the world they had built. She told him she was not for sale. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the river stone. It was wet and cold, its surface polished smooth by years of her own anger and fear. She took his hand, the hand that had signed the ledgers and burned the letters, and she forced his fingers open. She dropped the stone into his palm. It was the only thing she truly owned, the only thing that was hers to give, and she gave it to him freely. She told him that now they were even. Now he had everything she had to give, and she had nothing left for him to take. Julian didn't move. He stood in the freezing rain, staring down at the small gray stone in his hand. The weight of it seemed to pull his shoulders down, stripping away the ducal posture he had worn like a second skin his entire life. He did not speak. He didn't try to argue or offer more money. He slowly sank to his knees in the mud, his expensive trousers soaking up the filth of the square. He gripped the stone so hard that his knuckles turned white, his head bowing as the rain washed over him. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Thornefield looked up at a woman and realized he was the one who was truly poor. The reversal of power was not a loud or sudden thing. It happened in the quiet weeks that followed. Julian did something that no one in the county expected. He abdicated his responsibilities. He turned the management of the Ashford estates over to a distant cousin, settled the remaining debts his father had created, and moved out of Thornefield Hall. He did not go to London or the continent. He moved into a small, neglected hunting lodge on the edge of the village, a place with only 4 rooms and a roof that leaked in the heavy rains. He lost his social standing, his invincibility, and the reflected glory of his title. He became, quite simply, a man. Evelyn recovered. Her strength returned with the spring. And with it, a new sense of purpose. She did not return to the great house. Instead, she used the small amount of money she had saved from her laundry work to start a school for the village children. She taught them to read and write in the same cottage where she had nearly died. Her poverty, once a source of shame, became her power. She was respected by the villagers not because of who she was associated with, but because of the work she did with her own hands. She was no longer Miss Vance, the charity case. She was Evelyn, the teacher. Julian showed up at her school every morning for a month. He did not come to talk. He did not come to apologize. He came with an axe over his shoulder. He spent his mornings in the woods behind the cottage, chopping wood for the school stove. He did the manual labor of a servant without complaint and without an audience. He did not ask for her thanks, and he did not seek her attention. It was a private penance, a way of earning her trust through the one thing he had never given her, his time and his humility. He was learning that the value of a man is not found in what he can buy, but in what he is willing to do when no one is watching. Evelyn Vance learned that the cost of a name is often the soul itself, and Julian Ashford learned that a throne is merely a lonely chair if it is built on the debts of others. They found each other again not in a ballroom, but on the porch of a small cottage as the sun began to set over the Derbyshire hills. There were no servants to announce them, no silk dresses to stain, and no ledgers to keep track of who owed what. There was only the sound of the wind in the trees and the quiet, steady rhythm of 2 people who had finally learned how to stand on their own. Julian sat on the edge of the porch, his hands calloused and his face leaner, harder, and finally honest. He was mending a section of the picket fence that had rotted over the winter. Evelyn sat in a chair nearby, a book resting in her lap, watching the way the light caught the gray of the river stone where it sat on the small table between them. It was a quiet, domestic scene, one that would have been unthinkable a year before. Julian stopped his work and looked at her. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out and took her hand. He didn't pull her toward him, and he didn't try to lead her anywhere. He just held it, his skin warm against hers. In the end, they found that the only thing worth owning is the right to choose who walks beside you in the dark. Thank you for listening to this tale of pride and penury on Whispered Thrones. If you haven't yet, do subscribe. It is the only coin I ask for our time together. If you choose to remain a stranger, well, I shall expect a favor by the time the next frost thaws. Until next time, remember, some riches are only found once you've lost everything else.